Welcome back to Zenith Poker. Today we'll be covering how to increase your win rate, and I'm going to explain this across 5 different levels of player, from noob all the way up to pro. So the first player type that we have today is the noob player. So this type of player is at the very beginning of their poker study journey, and these players may have played for a period of time quite casually, focusing on kind of the gambling aspect of the game. But now these players want to start to think about poker as a game of skill, and so they want to increase their skill at the game. So I expect these players to start off at the micros or low stakes and actually have a win rate less than 0. So we'll be losing at these kinds of games. The number one way for these types of players to improve is to study combinatorics. So they're shifting away from focusing on the game as a my hand versus your hand way of thinking and moving towards a ranged base way of thinking. They should be thinking about counting the number of combos in a range and then comparing the relative strength of the ranges of both players and comparing how strong their hand is within their own range and how strong that particular combo is in relation to the opponent's range. One piece of free software that works really well for combinatorics is Equilab. The free version of Equilab has all of the essential tools required for beginners to get really good at combinatorics and combo counting and range versus range analysis. With Equilab, you can put in a particular hand or a range of hands and compare that to another hand or range of hands. And so you can use it to rank a particular hand in your own range on a particular board, or you can compare how that particular hand plays against the opponent's range or calculate the equity that hand has against the opponent's range on a particular board. So as an exercise for beginners, I recommend that you practice by writing down the preflop ranges of both players, both yourself and the opponent, and then think about how your particular combo, your particular hand, ranks within your own range as the board changes, and how that hand compares to the opponent's range as the board changes. So you would do this for preflop, and then you would do this for the flop, the turn, and the river, and all you're doing is comparing how your hand ranks within your own range and how it compares to the opponent's range in terms of equity. So if you do this exercise a few hundred times, you'll get really good at understanding sort of a range-based approach of thinking about the game, and then you can move on to the next level of player. So the next type of player we have is the novice player. So they've started playing poker and they understand that the game is played as ranges playing against each other rather than individual hands. And now they want to improve to get to the next level. These players are probably around break even at the micros and low stakes games. Or in other words, they're just sort of breaking even against the rake. They can regularly beat the fish and the whales in the micros, but they're still struggling to create an overall positive win rate at the micros or these low stakes games. For the novice player, it is absolutely essential to start using a solver. In fact, studying with a solver is the number one way to improve as a poker player, regardless of your skill level. One of the common pitfalls that the beginner will make when they get their hands on a solver is to start creating their own simulations. Creating and running high quality simulations is actually a very high level skill as a poker player. And so as a beginner, I would recommend avoiding creating your own simulations, at least for now. Instead, for the novice player, I recommend using the simulations from more advanced players. So when you get a solver, often that means that you can view the simulations that have been run from other players as long as you have a copy of that simulation. So Zenith Poker actually has a quite extensive library of free simulations for the solver GTO Plus. GTO Plus is a very beginner-friendly solver, and it's quite inexpensive and easy to use. And on the Zenith Poker website, there's a variety of free training videos on actually how to use GTO Plus and get the most out of that free library of simulations that is available on the Zenith Poker website. As a novice, you should be using the solver and learning to get your head around what the solver is actually telling you. As a beginning player, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the amount of information that the solutions actually tell you. So it's important to take a step back and try to get an overall picture of what the solution is actually telling you. When you're starting off, you might not really understand what the solver is saying. But with regular and consistent practice and looking at a wider variety of sims, you will be able to eventually piece together what is actually happening in the solution. For novices, I recommend a study ratio of about 1 hour to every 3 to 5 hours of play. At the early stages in your poker career, playing is quite important, and study should be used to try to identify the mistakes that you're making. So as a beginning player, you should be trying to get quite a bit of volume in, but still make sure to chunk out some time to identify the mistakes that you're making and try to get on top of those mistakes. One of the ways that the beginning player can do this is by comparing the way that they've played a particular hand to the way that the solver might have played it. So you look at one of the hands that you've played, you think that you're unsure about how you've played it, and then you try to find a similar spot in a solver database that you can get from the Zenith Poker library, for example. Then you're taking it and you're comparing the way that you've played it to the way that the solver played that particular combination. So you're asking yourself the questions, how did the solver actually play that combo? Did the solver choose a different line or a different bet size? What is the actual EV or the equity of that particular combo in this particular line? And how does that EV and equity change if you look at a slightly different line? How much equity does my hand have against my opponent's hand? And where does my hand rank in my own range? And you should be going through those questions every time that you look at a solution that the solver is telling you, and really just go through and take basic steps to try to understand the mistakes that you're making. Creating a basic study routine is pretty important. Even if you only play one session per week, you should still try to incorporate an hour or so of study into your schedule. And I recommend doing this before the beginning of your session. And you can use this to identify the weaknesses of the previous session and kind of just warm up your brain when you're going into actually playing the session that you have planned for yourself. Another way to improve is to actually meet other poker players. Nowadays, this is basically always done online, and there are plenty of free groups that you can join. There's also plenty of paid groups that you can join, but as a beginner, you can just join the free ones. One big free group that the Zenith Poker community has is the Zenith Poker community Discord. And I'll leave a link to the Discord group in the description below. And joining a group lets you post your own hand histories and get advice from stronger players. And you can look at how other players think about the way that they're analyzing the hand and how the ranges interact with each other going through the hand. The next type of player is the regular player or the intermediate player. With consistent study, these players will often move quite rapidly up through the stakes. I expect these players to be winning at the micros and to be finding some success at the low stakes. So these players will have small positive win rates at 25 to 100 NL. My advice to these players is to focus on increasing their study volume. So often these kinds of players can feel stuck, just grinding countless hours at 25 NL or 50 NL, and they feel that they never make any progress. But when I talk to them, I find that they're actually not studying that much. They're playing 6, 8, 10, 12-hour sessions over the weekend, and they don't put any study into their game at all. Or maybe they just put, an hour of videos here or there. Make sure that you're actually studying while you're playing. As for the novice, I recommend that these kinds of players start to incorporate 1 hour of study for every 3 to 5 hours of play. If you're trying to move up as fast as you can, you actually need to study more relative to the amount that you play. So instead of studying for 1 hour for every 3 to 5 hours of play, you might actually want to increase that to a ratio of 1 hour to every 2 to 3 hours of play. Now, just because you've increased your study ratio, that doesn't mean that you're going to beat 200 NL overnight. Moving up from the low stakes towards the small stakes will take consistent effort over a sustained period of time. So make sure that you're studying consistently, and you should try to even incorporate 1 hour of study per day. And if you do this over a period of months, you'll actually get far ahead of your competition, and you'll find that you will move up in a relatively short period of time. And then you can think about these study sessions as if you were going to the gym or practicing for a sport. It's actually the sustained, consistent, deliberate practice that gets your game to the next level. Now that you've decided, sure, I'm going to study for an hour a day, you might think that is actually easy to run out of things to study. That's not really true. The game of No Limit Hold'em is actually enormous. And so you should be focusing on a breadth-first approach. There's so many different formations and scenarios that you can get involved in. And so as the intermediate player, you should focus on training your intuition to be able to tackle a wide variety of different scenarios. And this way of studying is actually much more effective than looking at a single scenario in extreme detail. You still want to have high quality simulations, but you might not spend as much time on each individual simulation, and aim for a wider variety of simulations or a wider variety of scenarios. So you can get this breadth by looking at large databases of simulations, such as the free sims in the Zenith Poker library. This library has about 3,000 different sims on a variety of different formations. The sims are split into multiple databases of different flops, with each of these flop databases containing flops that are sort of similar in character. So if you spend 1 to 2 hours on each of these different databases, you'll easily get over 200 hours of study time. And if you're spending 1 hour per day, that's 200 days that you could study just from the free sims. So at this level, studying high quality sims is absolutely essential. Low quality sims are susceptible to missed bet sizes or suboptimal bet sizes or raise sizes. And if you have a solution that only has 1 bet size per node, you should really only use it for experimental purposes, and otherwise you should just think of it as noise. Any solution that is given to you or you've run yourself that only has 1 bet size per node, you really shouldn't be looking at it. You should almost just throw it in the bin, throw it away, delete it. It's really only useful in experiments in order to build up to a bigger sim with multiple sizes. So I recommend that you look at sims with at least 3 bet sizes per node. So this means that for the first bet, you might have a small bet size, a medium bet size, and a large bet size, or an overbet, or both. And you should also have multiple raise sizes. Often in the solution, if a player makes a raise, they're trying to set up a good sack to pot ratio on the turn or the river. And if you don't have enough raise sizes, the solver won't be able to do that. And so the solver will disfavor raising if there aren't enough raise sizes. And your solution will have a suppressed raising frequency. The solution won't be raising as often as it actually would raise if there were more raise sizes in the sim. The next type of player is the expert player. So the expert player wins at the low stakes and is starting to take shots at the small stakes or the mid stakes. They're players that will have been studying consistently over the period of about a year, and maybe they start to try to create their own high quality simulations. These kinds of players have a broad base of knowledge and they're quite comfortable with the common formations, and they can be found sort of battling it out at 200NL or 500NL, either with a small positive win rate or they're kind of breaking even at these kinds of levels. The expert player makes sure to spend time on studying a wide variety of high quality simulations. My advice to these players is to ensure that they have a strong foundation in the optimal or equilibrium theory. It's essential to have studied a wide variety of simulations at least once, or looked at a wide variety of different formations at least once. And for the more common formations, you should spend time digging in and studying the nuances of each solution. You should focus on playing optimally across different runouts and learn to play the same combo in different ways. So, for example, you can compare how a particular combo plays as a bet or as a check raise. As an expert, you need to have both the breadth of knowledge as well as starting to add in depth to your game. Then once you're fairly comfortable with playing close to equilibrium, you think that you have a good breadth of knowledge and you have studied quite deeply into the very common formations, you should look to start to deviate from equilibrium in order to exploit the weaknesses of other players. So one way to do this is to take the equilibrium solution and then node lock an opponent's deviations. Then the solver will end up producing an answer that will increase your win rate above the equilibrium position against this particular player. But one thing that you should be wary of is that for the nodes that you haven't locked, the solver will produce a strategy that counteracts the mistake that you've locked into the sim. This is the time as an expert or an early expert that you should be looking at getting a coach or start to invest in more paid training. Getting a coach means that you have a professional player giving you objective feedback about your game, and they can point you in the right direction when it comes to your study. Paid training will also broaden your approach to the game, because often in paid training videos, you'll get an elite player's explanation of the nuances about the specific solutions, and you'll get a different point of view about the solution and how those solutions can impact your own game. The next type of player above the expert is the pro. So the professional cash game player will have looked at thousands of different simulations and have developed a very powerful intuition for the game. These players are either playing poker for a living or they're playing part-time in order to supplement their regular income. These players will consistently beat 500 NL and have no issues jumping into higher level games, higher stake games that they're rolled for. Professional players should now shift their focus towards increasing their hourly rate. So your hourly win rate is essentially just the win rate multiplied by the number of hands that you play per hour. So this means that pros have two main methods for increasing their hourly. They can either increase their win rate or they can increase the number of hands that they played per hour. But if you play faster, this often means that the quality of your play will go down, and so your win rate decreases. On the other hand, if you try to play higher quality hands, this means that you're often going to spend more time on each decision and your rate of play will decrease. My recommendation for the professionals is to first focus on increasing the number of tables that they play. So first get that speed and pace of play to increase. So I recommend playing at least 2 tables of Zoom or more than 4 tables of regular, and maintaining a high number of simultaneous tables is essential to long-term success as a professional player. On the other hand, if you play too many tables, this will just cause the quality of your play to decrease significantly, and it's going to have a detrimental effect on your hourly rate. So therefore, I recommend playing 2 to 3 Zoom tables or 4 to 8 regular tables at the same time. Try not to mix too much between Zoom and regular, because the pace will often cause you to make some small mistakes. Once you're comfortable with playing these many tables, then you should go back and focus on the quality of your play. Because now you have an increased rate of play, you'll often find that you're going to make a lot of very small mistakes. And so pros need to be able to eliminate small mistakes that they're making while maintaining a high rate of play. So this means that pros need to play their A game for as long as possible and playing as many tables as possible. Even if you're just playing one C game session where you're losing, that could just wipe out multiple winning sessions. As a professional, one thing that is critical is limiting the effect of fatigue. So when you're playing hundreds of hands per hour, the number of decisions has a draining effect on your mind. If your mind is tired, you're going to make poorer decisions and you're going to start to lose. Therefore, it's vital to schedule shorter sessions with lots of breaks. So I recommend playing at most 3 sessions per day, and for each of those sessions, play for at most 2 hours, with about a half an hour to 1 hour break in between sessions. And if you're not feeling well for any reason at all, you should just not play that day, and you should shift your focus away from playing to studying or doing other things that you need to do. As a professional poker player, you should treat yourself as an esports athlete. And since esports is a relatively sedentary activity, it's crucial to maintain a decent level of physical activity as a professional poker player. Regular exercise helps with clarity of thought while you're playing. So make sure that you get regular exercise, preferably every day. Another thing that's very important for poker players is sleep. Numerous studies show that poor sleep leads to impaired judgment, inattention, reduced concentration, and lack of sleep also makes learning more difficult. So you won't absorb as much information from your study. So this means that you as a professional should identify when you've had nights where you've had poor sleep and avoid playing the next day. You should focus on maintaining a good sleep schedule and try not to shift your sleep time around too much. Doing all these things means that you can maintain a high level of play and study over an extended period of time. As a professional, we're going to be playing many hours a week for hundreds of hands per hour over the periods of potentially months. So maintaining your physical and mental health is incredibly important. Otherwise, you're just going to crash and start losing money. All right, so that's my 5 levels and how to increase your win rate for each of those levels. Let me know what you thought of this video. I hope you enjoy this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now.